vocabulary that we use, which we have to use, is very poor in communication of really what climate change is. So we have the most important issue that humanity has ever faced, and democracy is basically excluded from that. COPs have basically been taken over by the oil interests, by the petrostates. In 1994, Saudi Arabia said, no way, no, no, no. What we want is that everybody has to agree. In the early days, they were so horrible. The words and the language they used, I mean, you don't bear repeating. Gates's argument is absolutely absurd. The issue of climate change, it's all about children. Extreme weather events were driven by human activities, were driven by emissions. Climate change is the worst, biggest driver of poverty and diseases. They're all tipped because we can't avoid 1.5 with that. We can't avoid 2. That means they're all tipped. The worst thing about climate change science and the IPCC is they only project to 2100. Melissa, should be a message. They are going to continue to get worse, obviously.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to another episode of Science Talk. I'm your host, Dr. Muhammad Ittifaq. In this episode, I'm absolutely thrilled to introduce someone who is a retired family physician, MD, medical doctor, and very active on X, or the platform we don't like much, but we have to do something, instead of just staying away from it. He shares a lot of insightful content on climate change, food systems, sustainable development, and biodiversity. But before I introduce to my guest today, I would like to thank all of you who have been very much supportive of the conversation I've been having with experts on various aspects of climate change. If you're joining us for the first time, welcome. And if you enjoy the content, please like, share, and subscribe. We need more people who care about the planet and the planetary health in general. So, Dr. Peter Carter, he's the director and the founder of Climate Emergency Institute and IPCC reviewer. I have a few questions for him about that too. He also hosts of a YouTube channel called Peter Carter. I would definitely recommend you to check that out, and I'm gonna put that link in the description below. Peter, welcome to Science Talk.
Oh, thank you. It is more than a great pleasure to be with you, because you've explained to me that your academic life is in communication. And for many years, I've realized, and unfortunately, it's getting better, but it's still the case. I've realized that, there never has been a more important, vital issue that has been so poorly communicated than global climate change. Even the vocabulary that we use, which we have to use, is very poor in communication of really what climate change is. So, well done. I'm very grateful to you for doing that work.
Absolutely. So thank you so much. So let's start with the COP, which is coming probably starting next week, and it's going to continue next 2 weeks. Thousands of people are going to gather in Brazil this year, and that is COP 30. And I know previously you have been a little bit critical, but I want you to send a message, or what do you want to say to those people who are attending COP in the next 2 weeks?
Well, the one good thing about having the COPs every year is it is a media event. So the media, it goes on for 2 weeks, I don't know how they can keep, talking around in circles for 2 weeks. But so we have media coverage on climate change, every couple of days. So that's the one good thing. But apart from that, they're absolutely terrible. Can I explain why they're terrible?
Yes, absolutely. Yes.
Okay. So the climate conferences are supposed to help implementing the 1992 United Nations Climate Change Convention. And as you can see, I've been around this aspect for a long time. I can remember the Rio and the agreement on the Climate Change Convention there, which is a wonderful thing. And I was quite pleasantly surprised that it is a great convention. Unquestionably, to me, it's the strongest convention there is. But what's happened with the COPs is because the COPs have basically been taken over by the oil interests, by the petrostates, they have watered down the convention more and more and more. And Paris was a big watered down of the convention. Now, that actually is not allowed because one of the clauses in the convention is that any protocol or whatever you want to call it, agreement that comes down, still the 1999 convention rules. So that is still the legally binding, and it's very specifically legally binding, specifically to countries, specifically to the responsibilities and the requirements agreed on the big economy countries. And very few people really, very few people understand how good that convention is, which is a shame. They're set up to fail. So the COPs are set up to fail. And that was really unfortunate. And it happened in 1994. When the convention was published, it had a clause which said if there are disagreements, which it didn't expect, then the disagreements have to be settled by consensus. So consensus is in the United Nations General Assembly. On most matters, it's simple, 50% or 50%. On what they call important matters, it's a 2/3 majority, right? So everybody assumed that it's going to be a 2/3 majority for the climate change. But when it was put on the table in 1994, Saudi Arabia said, no way, no, no, no. What we want is that everybody has to agree, unanimity. So after that, the COPs really couldn't achieve anything, because what that did was, and some, there've been good articles and papers on the perverse voting in the climate change. It's unique. I mean, it's absolutely unique. And it's given the petrostates, in effect, a veto. So whenever anything important comes up, and this has happened over and over and over, the public don't see this. The media quite properly don't report it very much. They have reported on occasions, but not often. They've been good. They've reported, what the issues are and whether any progress is being made. So here we are, COP30. I just cannot believe that there's a estimated 50,000 people going,
Yeah,
and
yeah.
The other thing about the COPs is they are not democratic, right? So we have the most important issue that humanity has ever faced, and democracy is basically excluded from that. Everything is decided and done by the nation states. And the nation state system has some real problems, and of course we're seeing it now. So I think that's probably the worst thing about the COP process. There's no democracy in it.
Yeah, they should change their name, Conference of Parties, to Conference of Nations. Maybe it's con. So it's a con job of climate change, So
Yes, that's right. That's a Nick Breeze's paper, a book rather.
Yeah, they should say like Conference of Nations instead of Conference of Parties if they're not going to listen to other parties, And then might is right. The rich countries are deciding what's going to happen. And of course, what we expect from that, absolutely. And it's been 10 years now, right? I mean, it started as a good thing to save the planet, but eventually it has been taken over, by these oil and gas companies. And now we put sometime heads of those conferences, that conference of parties, COP, is a head of, maybe a big oil and gas company person, as
That's
it
what we've
happens in
seen.
UAE, right?
Yep. And the first COP, the first convention was in Bonn, Germany. It was 1995. So I mean, we're looking at pretty well 30 years, right? Of
Yeah, but
COP.
Paris Agreement started, like that's what I mean. Like since Paris Agreement started, that's like 10 years now.
That's right. Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. which of course we were completely fooled by that. We were told the Paris Agreement is a binding agreement. It is not.
Mhm.
It is not. Whereas the convention in 1992 is binding. The one really good thing that has come out recently, of course, is the International Court of Justice. Their big assessment on the question which was posed to them by the small island states of the legality, right, of continuing to emit carbon and continuing to change the climate. And as you know, they made a very good, strong decision. So that now will be underpinning COP30. That will be brought up because it's very significant.
Yeah, and I talked with Peter Fikowski, who does work, on climate restoration. You have talked with him before on one of the climate emergency forum, and he does a lot of work on climate restoration. And he was saying that one good thing people do in COPs is they talk a lot, but one thing they do bad is they don't listen. So they're there to talk, but they're not there to listen. So I hope people who are watching this, if you're attending COP, or maybe someone who is attending COP, listen. This time, COP 30, just go there and listen to other people or listen to other parties.
The
So let
big question on this COP is: will the agreement that was made, which was an amazing achievement at COP 28 a few years ago, will that agreement hold? Because of course the fossil fuel corporations and their nations are already trying to water that down. Now, that was an amazing achievement because it was unanimous. And what it did was, it was under what they call the stock take, and that's part of the whole process under the convention. And what that did was it approved all of the mitigation requirements that the IPPCC 6 assessment put out in 2022. All of those were approved. Also, they agreed that on the need to transition from fossil fuels. So the big thing about this COP is, will the people that are going there, I hope they're aware of this, and that would be their big thing that they can do to push this.
So beyond the COP, ordinary people or people who are watching this episode, or in general, what do you think people need to know about climate change and they don't know?
Well, there's a lot that they don't know. And there's two reasons for that. One, of course, is the denial campaign, highly effective, still going on as strong and as evil as ever. I co-authored a book on that in 2018, and the book was called Unprecedented Crime, Climate Science Denial. So that has been well documented by, for instance, Greenpeace years and years ago. They were doing an Exxon report on a regular basis. So that's the problem for the individual person. But, it should be pretty simple. We have global surface warming, right? That obviously increases heat waves, and they increase, and that's been confirmed now without any question, right? And they're increased in frequency, intensity, and duration. People can really pay attention to that. That alone, right, is a dire emergency. And then, of course, we've got the forest fires that are increasing. The science now has confirmed that. That was sort of difficult to do for a long time, but that's now confirmed. And of course, we get droughts. We get more droughts and worse droughts, and again, longer lasting droughts. So they just have to focus on the fact that we have global surface heating. The surface of the planet is being heated up constantly. And then that inevitably leads to these increased extreme weather events. And that's the whole thing, really. The sixth assessment of the IPCC was very good at that. It's taken the scientists a long time to come to a decision that extreme weather events were driven by human activities, were driven by emissions. But in the sixth assessment, they were very definite, very good on that. Extreme weather events, all of them are increasing and they are driven by human activity, human emissions.
So you recorded a video recently, like a few months ago, titled that "Is it too late to address climate change?" And I think you referenced David Dasuki, a lot of his work and what he believes and what his arguments are in that video, which got a pretty good reviews, which is a great thing for people to listen. And based on the evidence we have now, last month there are many reports in October 2025, a lot of reports coming out about
Yes.
energy and, like planet heating and all that. Do you think, is it getting too late for humans or for us to address or to solve this climate crisis?
I've been frequently asked this very question for at least 15 years. And my response has always been, well, it's not looking good, but, we don't have crystal balls. We really can't see the future. But what it's not too late for is for you to get actively engaged in the issue, because it is what I call the issue of all issues of all time. So the big point is it's never too late for the individual to get involved, and that's lacking.
Yeah.
You probably noticed, because you're the communication expert on this, you probably noticed there's been a back off just in the past couple of years.
Yes.
I don't know whether this could be the Republican Trump administration, but definitely a very, very worrying back off of people's involvement with climate change. You mentioned it for the Benin conference. There's going to be a lot of talking. I've also been involved in some fairly big campaigns, environmental campaigns, as an expert witness. And the one thing to do is to talk about your issue. That's the biggest thing. Now, that's where the climate denial has been so horribly successful. What they've done is they've sullied the whole issue, because in the early days, they were so horrible. The words and the language they used, I mean, you don't bear repeating. On the leading climate experts in the main, plus death threats to the climate experts, and I know they've told me this. This is the result, I think, a lot of that. So people have to, there's a lot of talk about hope on climate change. So the other question is,
or optimism or
is
climate
there any hope?
optimism.
Is there any hope, right?
Yeah.
I don't think the word hope is right. I think the word is courageous. I think that's the right word. But we're in the worst situation I can ever remember in my lifetime on threats to our survival as a species, right? Because the nuclear threat never went away. It's now back with all these crazy, insane wars that are going on, which, by the way, are big emitters of greenhouse gases. And we've got the climate, which is now no longer climate change. It's now climate catastrophe.
Yeah.
You mentioned the Climate Emergency Forum. Actually, we did one this morning on one of the two very best ever scientist reports to have come out this year. And that was the tipping point report. So that was an absolutely excellent report. It was great. It had everything. And the other one you'll be very aware of is the Planetary Boundaries report. And they started putting out under Johan Rockström and his team at PKA. They started putting this out on an annual basis, and now they call it Planetary Health Check, which, of course, I really like. That's a great.
Yeah, and I think like those reports, we do talk about them, but like Joe Rogan is not going to talk about them, or CNN or Fox News is not going to talk about them.
Yeah.
It doesn't make to the mainstream news. That's the problem. Coral Reefs did make to the news.
Yeah, it did.
That tipping point. It's of course like it was too big to ignore. But after that, we just kind of the news media go back to the business as usual. But
Right.
but one thing they're talking about, and that is a person who's not as rich as maybe we are, Bill Gates, right? He's been talking and he came up with three truths about climate change. or whatever he's calling them. And I think all people are now um, kind of responding to his framing of climate change issue. I mean, he's well versed, of course. He's a very influential, big figure. Has done amazing work on vaccines and improving health and other things. But I think the biggest thing, what I noticed, I read that twice just to understand where is he coming from, and I think he failed to draw a connection between climate change and poverty, climate change and health, climate change and a lot of other things. Like if climate change got worse, everything else would be worse. And he did not make that connection. And I was like, why are you not able to see that? Which a lot of research has been put out, that what is the connection between climate change and national security, climate change and food systems, climate change and agriculture, climate change and vulnerable communities, climate change and how these people migrate to other places, right? And he ignores all of that and just like gonna pick these things. What do you think of his report? What would be your reaction to that?
I've read two reports from him. The one that he's taking to COP30,
Hmm.
which reframes climate change, as you say, in the worst kind of way. Um, uh, I say worse, but very cleverly, right? He's a clever
Absolutely.
man, that's for
Yeah.
sure. But there's another essay in which he backtracks from that.
Mm.
And then he says how important climate change is. Um, uh, um, in a way, luckily, Climate Emergency Institute, we were putting out one of our mail outs to all of the G20
Hmm.
and all of the most vulnerable countries, their leaders, and also to the leaders of the negotiators. So we were mailing out to all of those people. And then Bill Gates' thing come up.
Mm.
So I said, oh, we've got to add something to the abstract,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
We've got to add that climate change is the worst, biggest driver of poverty and diseases, right? Because Gates's argument is absolutely absurd,
Mm.
right? So he says, well, I've been involved in African diseases and things like that, which he has, which is great,
Yeah.
and looked at poverty with his foundation. But to say that, well, climate change can be put on the back burner while we address poverty and diseases, that's absurd. Because obviously, I think everybody knows, I mean, the Lancet said it years ago, that climate change is the main increasing driver of both poverty and diseases. So it's a very, very bad thing that this man did. And I'm very disappointed. I'll tell you why. Because back in 2010, Bill Gates produced a short video, which is probably still the best video on climate change. But it was called Getting to Zero Emissions. And he really, really, he said he talked to the scientists, and this is what the scientists told him, and we have to get to zero emissions, and we have to get fast. So his YouTube was called Innovating to Zero. It's absolutely excellent. So, to see him, you know, um, uh, backtracking, not supporting the future, you know, the issue of climate change, it's all about children,
Mm-hmm.
all about children, because of the long lags in the system, right? So, when
Yeah.
we do something about our emissions, there's still a long lag between that happening and seeing a change in the global temperature increase.
Yeah, and I think two other things, and then I'm going to talk a little bit about the children. And you mentioned a couple of other videos too that IPCC reports do not mention future generations or children in the climate change impact. So we're going to talk a little bit, but I think the timing of Gates' piece is very important. It's right before you go to
Mhm.
COPs. Number one, number two, looking at the U.S. position on climate change right now and like kind of committing
Yeah.
hundreds of millions of dollars to innovate in technology. On the other hand, you're denying, or not completely denying, but like kind of downplaying the dangers of climate change.
Mhm.
Of course it's not a good idea, but I think he might be pleasing some higher ups as well, as they're going to cops and not to commit on things. And they are doing a lot of AI and going to build data centers, and that's going to consume a lot of energy, and that is going to make people's electric bills go up, right? So I think he's maybe like trying to gain something out of it, and the timing is absolutely important right
Yeah.
before going to cops.
And yeah, he submitted it to COP already. He's got this letter, and he's going to be pushing it. And of course, he's still a big name. He's well known. So people are going to hear this, you know. And unfortunately, things are so terrible now. What I've been doing for many, many years is what I call telling the terrible truth.
Mhm.
Um, uh, and it's really, really terrible now. And we need, you know, the Secretary General, Antonio Guterres. He's been very, very good.
Mhm.
He'll be there, so he'll be good, and he will argue against this very strongly. And
Yeah.
but Gates is a name of influence. So
Yeah,
yes,
is it like I think you said somewhere, but like are we I asked David Spratt from he's a climate analyst from Australia.
yes, I know David
Yeah,
well.
yeah. So, and he didn't claim, but I think there is some climate modeling which showing that we might hit 3 degree, we might reach 3 degree by 2050, where you are claiming that we might reach 2 degree by 2040. And on the other hand, we are so off of the IPCC reports and United Nations climate change, modeling and predictions. So is it like kind of pretty much kind of not of course science is not settled, it's always changing, but like is it a likelihood that we're gonna hit 2 degrees by 2040?
Well, it's a great question because most people, if they have the slightest bit of interest in climate change, they will think that we can still limit to 1.5 degrees C.
Hmm.
And the reason for that is that everybody has sort of united on this delusion,
Hmm.
you know, that we can still limit to 1.5 degrees. I mean, even the scientists are saying this. There's a few now
Yeah.
who are saying, no, 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 it's way too late. No, we're at 1.5 degrees C, right? As you know, for the past 18 months, we've been at 1.5 and above for most of those months. You know, there's been a long, long run
Hmm.
of above 1.5 degrees C. Last year was the record in global temperature. This year is going to be very close, very close. Okay. So 1.5 degrees C is gone. James Hansen said that months ago. He's also said, and he's right, that 2 degrees C is gone, right? Because Hansen works everything out by radiative forcing and energy imbalance, and which is the best way to do it. And in his paper, Pipeline, Global Warming in the
Global
Pipeline,
warming in the pipeline, yeah.
he said, and his colleagues, there were a lot of authors on that paper, by the way. He said that no, 2.4 degrees C is now in because of the heat in the climate system.
Hmm.
So 2.2 degrees C is gone. 2 degrees C is the point of no return.
Hmm.
What we discussed this morning on the tipping point paper with the Climate Emergency Forum was they're all tipped. They're
Hmm.
all tipped because we can't avoid 1.5 with that. We can't avoid 2. That means they're all tipped. That is dire, dire, dire emergency, and we have to get that out. We have to get out. I'm afraid how bad it is. Now, 3 degrees C came up recently
Yeah.
because of a publication out of Germany from their government, a publication of actuaries and policymakers. We had actually a similar one out of the UK earlier this year. And they did a very good scientific assessment. And they said that 3 degrees C is certainly more than possible.
Hmm. And you said that, and just because we also talked a little bit about hope, but talking about the doomsday kind of situation, that the warming will be continuing even after 2100, because we're not stopping burning fossil fuel, and we're still relying and we're still producing coal, oil, and gas. So is that like, why do you think that the warming will continue after 2100?
Well, most of the warming, as you know, over 90% goes into the ocean. So the oceans act as a heat engine. For warming to stop, all of this heat in the oceans has to equilibrate with the temperature on the surface. And the science has been absolutely definite from the very first IPCC assessment in 1990. It's been absolutely definite that we are committed to an unavoidable higher degree of warming at any time compared to the present warming. So we're at 1.5 degrees C now, as I say. The IPCC adds, although they don't talk about it, but the IPCC adds another 75% of warming on top of today's warming. So that's why we're there already. The worst thing, I'm glad you asked the question, and it's very perspective of you. The worst thing about climate change science and the IPCC is they only project to 2100. So they're not looking after future generations. They're not looking after all future generations.
Yeah.
Right? And one of the things I try to do, and I still try and do it, is to explain to people what you know, obviously, with that question, which is goes along. It goes on for about 1,000 years.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
And of course, what also goes on is the melting of the ice sheets,
Yes.
the melting underneath the ice sheets in particular from the ocean heat. That continues. So sea level rise is going to go on and on and on and on.
So, what is IPCC relying on? Why are they not listening to the experts, or why are they not? So, when you review, explain the review process for IPCC, because you are one of the reviewers and many other scientists who review these reports. And what kind of suggestions do you recommend, or is there like a mechanism that they put out the report, you review it, and suggest, and like they accept, not accept on the report? And how does this process work?
Well, it's similar to what I said about
Peer
the
review.
convention and the voting of the convention.
Mhm.
So the IPCC was set up to fail. It was a good idea because they involve policymakers,
Mhm.
government policymakers sitting on the panel. That's an absolute no-no to any scientific assessment, right? When we do an environmental health assessment, we make sure that government is not involved in any way at all until we've got the assessment out.
Yeah.
But the IPCC made a totally unique and different decision. The argument, I think, was, well, at least it lets us know that the governments have been informed. But that's actually worked worse and worse and worse against us
Hmm.
because the governments also, in effect, have a veto against how much IPCC puts in. They have a strong influence on the language, so you'd be interested in that. Very strong influence on the language. IPCC has two conferences, mini conferences, with the policymakers in which they negotiate, the scientists negotiate with the policymakers on what can we put in order to publish.
Yeah.
So obviously that's a very poor way to go. Now the result is yes. So the IPCC does not project heating, climate change, and impacts beyond 21 degrees C, which is, I mean, one of the huge problems about climate change is it goes on forever. You
Yeah.
know, that's one of the reasons, big reasons why we've
Yeah.
always been so worried about it.
Exactly. That's why we need to be concerned. It's not
Yeah,
like it's going to stay in 50 years and after that it's going to go back to normal, but it's not going
that's
to happen.
right.
So
That's right.
that's exactly the issue. And I mean, like, climate change and these calamities, flooding, droughts, wildfires, these intense, weather patterns or problems, they do hit the most vulnerable people first. And that
Yeah,
is children specifically and the future generations, because people have, young generation have a climate anxiety. They're super worried about their career. The AI was not enough to scare them, and we have a climate change, right? So why they are still not able to like put children and future generations in the first place, like, you know what, this is what we're going to do.
Yeah, climate change is and should always have been
Mhm.
all about our children, and it's not.
Yeah.
Children and young people, hardly get a look in, right?
Mhm.
Children, small children, are most vulnerable to every single impact of climate change,
Yeah.
every single one. And not only that, of course, but they're more vulnerable because they are living their life
Yeah.
under a rapidly changing and disrupting climate. Children should have been front and center all along. You're right, the IPCC assessment barely mentioned children, barely. What they did was, and this is not going to be helpful because nobody else apart from me and a few others will read it. They did a sort of special essay on what's the effect on children. And it was very, very sobering indeed. But we all have to, when we think climate change, thanks for the question, we all have to think children.
Yeah. Absolutely. And one of the things recently happened the past week, Hurricane Melissa, and
Mm-hmm.
that stayed in the news for a couple of days, and now we forgot what happened and what the devastation looked like and how much damage it has done, and who in Cuba and in Jamaica, we're not talking much, and media is not definitely talking
No,
much.
no.
Because like, yeah, it's coming, it's coming, it's coming, it's gone. Like, okay, move on to next news, right? So, and talk a little bit like, like these events. Of course, this is a natural cycle, but the heat in the ocean and also the climate change is making these hurricanes worse, more extreme, and more frequent, right?
Yeah. So just to mention first the vulnerability issue. Yeah, right from the word go, we've recognized that there are most vulnerable populations and regions. They're actually specified region by region in the 1992 convention. So, but we have been misled into thinking in the global north that that means we're really not vulnerable, that
Hmm.
we really sort of can ride it out. Well, that's absolutely not true. It's not true for two reasons, because now we know we're highly vulnerable to extreme weather. The United States is one of the most vulnerable countries in the
Yeah,
world, by the way,
absolutely.
to extreme
Different
weather
regions are
events.
prone to different things. Some
Yeah,
wildfires, some hurricanes, some flooding, some,
yeah,
yeah,
yeah.
some droughts.
And the other thing is that sort of dispels this idea that we can write it out. The other thing is the impacts on crops. So the crop models have been getting better, and now we know that all major food producing regions are highly vulnerable to climate change. And this is actually spelled out in the sixth assessment. So now I said I was going to praise you that. So you have to remind me about the question. Sorry.
Yeah, no, the question was about Hurricane Melissa,
Oh,
that
yeah,
these
yeah.
hurricanes are
Thank
becoming
you.
more stronger and more frequent and, more intense because of climate
Yeah,
change. And now we're thinking like maybe we should have category six, to
yeah,
have them. So just talk a little bit about like how the
yeah,
climate
yeah,
change
yeah.
is becoming, making these.
Obviously, America
Mhm.
should be alert on these hurricanes, tropical cyclones that are called hurricanes in the North Atlantic. I did a post actually just a couple of days ago, and I looked at Category 5 hurricanes. They have been the
Yes, I
very
think
worst
I saw
hurricanes.
that post from 1990s,
So you can see
2021.
it's
Yeah.
getting more and more and more and more, Category 5 hurricanes. So that's very definite. Can't get away from that. Melissa was quite amazing, and something we should learn about. What happened was Melissa, when it got near to the Gulf of Mexico, that region, it just sort of hovered. Now, what it was doing was that hovering was extracting a lot of heat from the surface ocean. The sea surface temperature increases, accelerating way fast. So it takes up all that heat and then bang, it takes off, right? And some of the winds within Hurricane Melissa are probably going to come out to be the highest mile per hour, kilometer per hour winds in a hurricane ever recorded, right? Now, we saw a similar thing with Hurricane Helene.
Helene,
You
yeah,
remember that?
yeah.
Shot right up the into the United States, the main regions of the United States. We did some time ago, we did a climate emergency forum session on hurricanes. And at that time, the scientists were not, they were on the fence. They weren't willing to say that climate change and its ocean surface heating is going to make hurricanes more powerful because their models hadn't predicted that by then. However, we went to the sixth assessment of the IPCC, and lo and behold, they did say that hurricanes are going to increase because of this heat energy absorbing as they go across the waters. Interestingly enough, I looked into it and I found a paper published in the United States, not based on modeling, but based on some aspects of physics, in which the paper said, oh, no, no, the United States is going to have to be very worried. These are going to get very, very severe. They're going to get more powerful. So, Melissa, should be a message. They are going to continue to get worse, obviously, because we are going to continue to have accelerating global warming and continue with accelerating global surface sea temperature. And when I say accelerating, they're going to accelerate faster and faster and faster. So these extreme weather events that already in the United States, they're like pummeling the United States, right?
Yeah, and I think yeah, Canada doesn't need to worry because Canada is becoming the US 51 state, so
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
so you'll be fine.
Canada, that's interesting because we've always thought that Canada would be amongst the least vulnerable, and I suppose it is. But when it comes to food security, agriculture production, the government of Canada 4 years ago did a very, very excellent assessment. And the extreme heat and the drought comes right up into Canada's breadbasket. So that's the big thing we're looking at in North America as a whole.
Yeah.
Our food production, which has to increase to meet the growing population, has already started in many regions to decrease. Right? And the IPCC explained this very well. They said that the rate of increase of food production, it's been great, right? It's a huge, huge success story, our world food production going up and up and up. But that is not the case any longer. Climate change is clawing that back.
Yeah,
So that
absolutely.
rate
I
of
mean, like,
increase is getting up.
even regardless of a country or a nation or people, it is going to affect each one of us. Some people are affected more than others, but everybody is going to be impacted by
Yes,
climate change. It doesn't matter your location or doesn't matter your status, but it's just some people are seeing more and early than others, and that's the
yes,
only
that's
difference.
exactly right.
Yeah.
That's exactly right. And the past IPCC chair in 2014, Rajendra Pachauri, made a statement that the government didn't like very much because he made a public statement that no one is going to be able to escape from the impacts of climate
Yeah,
change. Now
absolutely.
we're seeing the truth of those words.
Yeah, absolutely. So one of the things when we talk about climate change, other than food, is energy. And the problem with energy, when I talk with Professor Ilya Jacobson, and I think he was quite right that we, like many scientists around the world, were like, very happy to see Amber Energy report to see that renewable energy is more and we're producing more and spending countries are spending more money on that, like specifically China, where they cover with these solar panels with valleys and valleys covered with them. And but he said, like, we're not talking about total energy, we're just talking about electricity when it comes
Right.
to energy.
Yeah.
And that is a problem. And it's too early to celebrate that if we have solar panel, it's gonna drive your car or heat your house. And like, I mean, there are so many, or transportation, or even factories, right? So how, and planes, there are so many other sectors which we're not thinking about
That's right.
as a whole, right?
Yeah. So the publicity which is good publicity, has been following
Yeah.
this sort of meteoric increase in wind power and solar power. But it's really not increasing very much faster, just a tiny bit faster than fossil fuel energy is increasing. And because fossil fuel energy is still 82%.
Yeah, we saw the report that 2024 was a record hit. Like
That's
it
right.
was the highest production
Yeah,
in coal and
ever.
gas. Yeah.
And there's a very good report that comes out every year now, and they're tabled for every COP. So this report would be tabled in Benin, Brazil, and it's called the production gap report. And they take in, this is most important, they take in the plans for energy, right? And they have worked out that 1.5 degrees C, it's like 200% more than it should be. So that dispels 1.5. But on 2 degrees C, I think they projected that the plans are 70% above 2 degrees C. So the plans for energy and the corporations are now highly aggressive. Oil and gas, fossil fuel corporations, highly aggressive on pushing their agenda for more and more and more. And as you say, yes, it is getting more and more and more. Mark Jacobson from Stanford, he's great. I'm really glad to hear that you interviewed him.
Yeah.
The only thing I dispute with him is that he says we can do it without nuclear energy. I don't think we can do it anymore without nuclear energy.
Interesting, because when I talk with Paul Dorfman from France, he's also he said like nuclear is too late for climate crisis, or is too slow, or is too costly. That was his like some of the arguments, and I interviewed him, and it got a lot of comments on YouTube, people saying that, oh no, we do need nuclear, and he's like, absolutely not. It's not, because the maintenance cost is too much. It's hundreds of billions of euros and dollars, and it's too late, and it takes forever to build these. And but China is doing rapidly, than other countries, right?
And India. What I was going to say
So you
was
were
that,
saying like you don't think we can do it without nuclear?
yeah, and the reason for that is a sort of logical reason. We've always been in a situation in which we need every source of lowest carbon energy, everyone. And of course, fission is a very, very big source of that. And that's recognized by the IPPCC. So that's sort of a tragedy for us, right? Because of Chernobyl and 3 Mile Island, and recently Fukushima, people are really turned off nuclear energy, and it's not surprising.
Yeah, it is not.
But
I
those
mean, it's for
were,
legitimate reasons. I mean, they're not wrong. If your family or the area you lived in, it's lived there forever. The consequence, the health consequences of that is devastating for
yeah,
generations.
there is definitely an increase in the incidence of childhood cancers, actually, in leukemia, downwind of nuclear plants. But those were old nuclear plants, so the ones, that is on the drawing board now.
Yeah.
They're on the drawing board, but only China and I think India. I think India are doing a thorium reactor right now. This is very funny because actually India took a plan for a thorium reactor, which the United States had back in the 70s or 80s. Um, so,
Uh,
so yeah, we need every source, every source. I don't think there's any arguing about that.
so before I let you go or wrap up, I ask this question to all of my guests: is what is something we need to talk more about climate change, and we're not talking about it?
The world needs to veganize. I was a vegetarian for a long time, and then I got more knowledgeable about climate change and methane emissions from cattle and deforestation in the Amazon. And then I said, oh, God, I have to give up that food that I really like now. So I have to go vegan. The world must go vegan, right? Um, uh, because cattle is a big, and beef is a big source of methane.
Yeah.
And because it only lasts 12 years in the atmosphere, if we reduce methane, unlike CO2, it almost has an instantaneous effect on reducing our emissions. And there are wonderful papers that confirm that. So go vegan, everybody. Number two, talk it up, talk it up, talk it up. Don't be afraid to bring this up in conversation. Don't be put off by people whose eyes glaze over, as Leonardo DiCaprio said in his movie.
Yeah, looking up, yeah.
Talk about this issue. Believe me, this is the issue of all issues of all time, and all time because it goes on forever.
Yeah, agree. And I think Thanksgiving is coming. So whenever you have a dinner with family, talk with them about climate change or
Right.
being vegan.
Good
That's a
opportunity.
good opportunity, but don't kill each other over that. So we have to leave it there. Thank you so much, Peter. It was a pleasure talking to you today.